The boy who woke before the sun. The city still slept under a blanket of soot-stained fog when Thomas Gray opened his eyes. The winter air bit at his skin the moment he pushed back the thin wool blanket. There was no fire in the grate. Coal was expensive, and every penny had to be stretched until it screamed. He was 14 years old, but his frame was thin and wiry, his shoulders already bent from work that belonged to men twice his age. The bed he rose from was nothing more than a straw-filled mattress in the corner of the one-room tenement apartment he shared with his mother and younger sister. The damp smell of mold clung to everything, and the walls, lined with peeling paper, whispered with the scurry of rats behind them. His mother stirred, her face pale and hollow in the half-light. "Up already, Tommy?" she murmured, her voice rough with fatigue. "Aye, Ma," he said, pulling on his patched trousers and the shirt with the missing buttons. "Best get to the factory before the foreman counts heads." She nodded, pride and worry wrestling in her eyes. "Eat something first," she said, handing him a slice of yesterday's bread, now hard as wood. He chewed it slowly, letting the stale crumbs soften on his tongue before swallowing. The streets outside were still dark, lit only by the faint orange glow of gas lamps. The snow on the cobblestones was gray and slushy from the passage of horses and carts. Tommy's boots were worn thin, the icy water seeped in, numbing his toes with every step. The factory loomed ahead, a brick giant with rows of tall windows, their glass fogged from the heat inside. Even before he entered, he could hear the clatter of machines, the hiss of steam, the dull thump of metal against metal. Inside, the air was hot and thick with the smell of oil and burning coal. Men and boys moved like shadows between the monstrous machines, their faces blackened with soot. The roar of the looms was deafening. Tommy took his place by the spinning frames, his small hands quick and nimble as he tied broken threads and fed bobbins into the rattling teeth of the machine. Hours blurred together. There was no clock on the wall, only the rhythm of the machines, the foreman's barked orders, and the endless parade of bobbins. His back ached, his eyes burned from the lint-filled air, but stopping meant a cuff to the ear or a deduction from his day's pay. When the lunch whistle blew, Tommy stepped outside, into the cold air, drawing in a breath that felt like freedom. He pulled a tin from his pocket. Inside was a single potato, boiled and split in half. He ate it slowly, sitting on the edge of the loading dock, watching the river of workers flow in and out of the factory doors. There were men here from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and even boys younger than him, their faces pale with hunger. One boy, little more than 8, stood near Tommy with no lunch at all. His lips were blue, and he hugged himself for warmth. Without thinking, Tommy broke his potato, in two again, offering the smaller piece to the boy. "Here," he said. The boy's eyes widened. "But then you'll have less." "I've had less before," Tommy shrugged. "Go on, eat." The boy took it and devoured it in 2 bites, nodding his thanks. For a moment, Tommy felt something, warm that had nothing to do with coal or sunlight. When the lunch whistle screamed again, they filed back inside. The afternoon hours dragged heavier than the morning. His fingers cramped and his vision blurred. But he kept working, each motion, etched into his muscles like a second heartbeat. By the time the day ended, 12 hours after it began, his legs shook from standing. His pay for the day was $1 silver, its weight in his palm far lighter than the exhaustion in his bones. He walked home in the dark again, the city lights flickering like distant stars. When he stepped into the tenement, the warmth of the small coal fire greeted him along with his sister's laugh. "Tommy!" she cried, running to hug him. "Ma said you'd bring bread." He smiled, pulling a small loaf from his coat pocket. "And maybe tomorrow," he said softly, "we'll have enough for butter." In that moment, with the scent of fresh bread filling the room, The Gilded Age did not seem so cruel. But deep down, Tommy knew tomorrow would bring the same long hours, the same aching bones, and yet he would rise before the sun again. The offer that came in the snow. The wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying with it the scent of burning coal and the faint tang of the river. The next morning, Tommy woke to the sound of his mother coughing, a deep, rattling sound that made his stomach knot. The cough had been there for weeks now, but it was getting worse. She waved it off when he asked, but he wasn't blind. Work, worry, and the cold were wearing her down. His sister Anna sat on the edge of the bed, braiding her tangled brown hair. "You're going to be late," she said. "I'm never late," Tommy replied, pulling on his damp boots. The leather had frozen stiff overnight. He winced as his toes pressed into the icy lining, but he didn't complain. The snow fell heavy that morning, blanketing the rooftops and muffling the sounds of the city. Tommy trudged through it, head down, watching, his breath curl into the air. His mind kept wandering to the potato he had given away yesterday, and to the boy's thin face. He hoped the lad had made it home safe. Inside the factory, the air was as suffocating as ever. Steam rose from the great metal looms, and the constant grinding made it feel like the building itself was alive and angry. The foreman, Mr. Daly, stalked the rows like a wolf among sheep, his eyes sharp, his hands quick to grab an ear or shove a shoulder if a worker slowed down. By midday, Tommy's hands were raw from tying threads. The lunch whistle came like a gift. As he stepped outside, the snow was still falling, the flakes melting on his overheated skin. It was then he saw him, the boy from yesterday. He stood near the fence, his coat too small for him, bare hands shoved deep into his pockets. "You, again," Tommy said, half smiling. "Did you eat today?" The boy shook his head. "Didn't have nothing at home." Tommy looked down at his lunch, a small hunk of bread and a carrot. He hesitated only a moment before breaking the bread in two again. "Here. You keep giving me your food," the boy said, taking it carefully as though it might vanish. "I'll live," Tommy said simply. "What's your name?" "Eddie," the boy replied, his voice almost shy. I could help you, you know. After work. I know ways to make extra money." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "What kind of ways?" Eddie glanced around, then leaned in close. "Not stealing," he said quickly. "Honest ways. There's a man near the docks pays boys to carry parcels to the train yards. Says he needs quick hands and quicker legs. You're quick." The idea lodged itself in Tommy's mind. Extra money could mean more coal for the fire, more food for his mother and Anna. But it also meant working after the factory. More hours, more exhaustion. Still, when the whistle blew to end the day, Tommy found himself following Eddie through the snow to the docks. The air there was colder, sharper, smelling of salt and wet rope. Ships loomed in the darkness, their masts like skeleton fingers clawing at the sky. Eddie led him to a small warehouse where a stout man in a thick coat stood by a stack of crates. "This him?" the man asked. "This is Tommy," Eddie said. "Fast as they come," the man looked him over. "Can you carry 50 pounds? "Yes, sir," Tommy said without hesitation, and just like that, he had a second job. For the next 2 hours, Tommy hauled crates from the warehouse to the rail yard, his breath coming in ragged clouds. His arms screamed with pain, but he didn't stop. By the end, the man handed him a coin, a $50, and clapped him on the shoulder. "Good work, lad. Come back tomorrow." Walking home that night, Tommy felt the weight of the coin in his pocket and something else in his chest. Hope! Maybe this was how things would get better. But as he rounded the corner to his street, the sight waiting for him froze him in his tracks. A horse-drawn carriage, black and sleek, stood outside his tenement, and on the steps, talking to his mother, was a man in a long coat and a top hat. The man turned as Tommy approached, his eyes sharp and assessing. "You must be Thomas Gray," he said. "I've heard interesting things about you." The man with the silver cane. The snow crunched under Tommy's boots as he stopped at the base of the tenement steps. The black carriage gleamed even under the dull glow of the gas lamps. Its wheels were clean, its harness polished to a shine. It didn't belong on this street. It looked like it had wandered in from another world entirely. The man standing beside his mother was unlike anyone Tommy had ever seen up close. His long black coat was made of fine wool, his gloves of soft leather. A silver-headed cane rested in his right hand, though it was clear he didn't need it to walk. His top hat cast a shadow across sharp, calculating eyes that seemed to see far more than Tommy wished they could. "This is him?" the man asked, his voice low but smooth. Tommy's mother nodded, a touch of pride in her tired face. "My son, Thomas? He's a good boy. Works hard." The man's gaze swept over Tommy, taking in his threadbare coat, his raw hands, his straight-backed stance. "I've heard you've been helping at the docks after your shift at the mill," he said. Tommy frowned. "How'd you hear that?" "I hear many things," the man said simply. "My name is Mr. Holbrook. I represent certain business interests in the city." He tapped the silver cane lightly against the step, as if marking time. "Boys like you, strong, quick, and unafraid of hard work, can be useful." Tommy didn't like the way he said useful. It made him feel less like a person and more like a tool. Still, extra work meant extra money, and he could see the way his mother's eyes lit up at the thought. "What kind of work?" Tommy asked. Halbrook's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Deliveries. Discretion is important. Payment is generous." "How generous?" Halbrook reached into his coat and pulled out a gold coin. He held it between his gloved fingers so the gaslight caught it, making it glow. "One of these for every completed errand." Tommy's breath caught. A gold coin was more than he made in weeks at the factory. With one of those, he could buy his mother coal for the whole winter, new shoes for Anna, maybe even meat for supper. But something inside him hesitated. "Why me?" "Because," Halbrook said softly, leaning in, "you're invisible. The rich don't see you. The police don't notice you. And that, my boy, is valuable." He placed the coin in Tommy's palm and closed the boy's fingers over it. "Think on it. I'll return tomorrow." Without waiting for a reply, he tipped his hat to Tommy's mother, stepped into the carriage, and was gone, the clatter of hooves fading into the snowy night. That night, Tommy sat by the small fire, turning the coin over and over in his hands. It was heavy, warm from his skin, and dangerous in ways he couldn't quite name. His mother's eyes followed it, though she said nothing. Anna, sitting cross-legged on the floor, stared at it like it was the moon. "You could say no," his mother said at last, her voice low. "You want me to say no?" Tommy asked. She hesitated. "I want you safe. But safe doesn't put food on the table." The wind rattled the window. Somewhere down the street, a drunk shouted in the night. Tommy slipped the coin into his pocket. "We'll see what he wants," he said. The next day, Halbrook's carriage was waiting when Tommy left the factory. Eddie was there too, leaning against the wheel, looking smug. "Told you he'd pick you," Eddie said. Halbrook opened the carriage door himself. "Come in, Thomas." Inside, the carriage was warm, lined with red velvet. Halbrook handed Tommy a small sealed envelope. "Take this to an address on Pearl Street. Do not open it. Do not speak of it. When you return, you will be paid." The address was in the Merchant District, a place Tommy had never been. The streets there were clean, the buildings tall and proud, their windows glowing with lamplight. The people wore furs and fine hats, and not one of them looked twice at him. He delivered the envelope to a man in a shop full of ticking clocks. The man said nothing, only nodded and handed him a small paper-wrapped package in return. Tommy carried it back to Holbrook, his hands itching with curiosity. Holbrook smiled faintly when he returned. "Well done. Here." He pressed another gold coin into Tommy's palm. Tommy stared at it. This was easy. Holbrook's eyes gleamed. It always is at first. The package in the dark. The gold coins were heavier than Tommy expected. Not just in weight, but in meaning. They clinked together in the tin box under his bed, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Every time he held one, he thought about how quickly they could be turned into bread, coal, boots. But also about the way Holbrook's eyes seemed to follow him, even when he wasn't there. 3 weeks passed. The errands grew stranger. Sometimes it was delivering sealed envelopes, sometimes carrying small, carefully wrapped packages to places where the street lamps didn't quite reach. The men who took them were always quiet, their hands quick, their eyes never meeting his for long. Eddie worked with him most nights. They didn't talk about what was inside the packages. They didn't ask, but the question hung between them like smoke. One freezing evening, Holbrook called Tommy into the carriage and handed him a package heavier than usual. "Tonight's delivery is important," he said. "Do not open it, and be quick. The address was down near the riverfront, past rows of warehouses where the wind whipped off the water like a blade." Tommy hurried along, boots slipping on the icy cobblestones. The lamps here flickered weakly, shadows pooling thick between buildings. He reached the warehouse door and knocked 3 times, just as Holbrook had instructed. The door creaked open, revealing a man with a scar across his cheek. The man snatched. "The package," muttered something under his breath and slammed the door. Tommy turned to go, but the sound of footsteps made him stop. 2 men stepped out of the shadows, their collars pulled high against the cold. "What's in the package?" "Boy?" one asked, his voice low and rough. Tommy's heart pounded. "Don't know, I just deliver 'em." The other man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "That's so? Maybe we should check." Before Tommy could move, Eddie's voice rang out from behind him. "Run, Tommy!" Tommy didn't think. He bolted, boots skidding on ice, breath tearing through his chest. The men gave chase, their footsteps pounding after him. He darted into an alley, leapt over a crate, and ducked behind a pile of barrels. Eddie slid. In beside him, both of them holding their breath until the footsteps faded into the distance. When it was safe, Eddie looked at him, wide-eyed. "You're playing with fire, Tommy. Those men weren't just curious. They're looking to take down Holbrook." Tommy swallowed hard. "Then maybe we stop." Eddie shook his head. "You think Holbrook lets people just walk away?" The truth of it settled heavy in Tommy's stomach. He had seen the way Holbrook smiled without warmth, the way he tapped that silver cane like a man keeping time with his own private clock. That night, when Tommy returned home, his mother was waiting. She eyed him carefully. "You're out later every week, and you come home with money you can't explain." "It's honest work, Ma," he said quickly. She didn't look convinced. "I was born at night, Tommy, but not last night. Whatever you're into, be careful." The following evening, Holbrook called him into the carriage again. This time, there was no package. Just the man himself sitting in the velvet seat, the gaslight catching the silver head of his cane. "I hear you had some trouble last night," Holbrook said, his voice calm but cold. Tommy froze. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Holbrook leaned forward. "You handled it because Eddie was there. Loyalty is rare, Thomas, but so is weakness. If a man cannot keep his errands quiet, he cannot work for me." Tommy's chest tightened. "Eddie's not weak." "Perhaps not," Holbrook said softly. "But he is expendable." Tommy's fists clenched. "If you touch him—" Holbrook raised a hand, cutting him off. "I touch no one. Others may not be so kind." The meaning was clear. and for the first time since stepping into Halbrook's world, Tommy felt something stronger than hunger or ambition: fear. That night, as snow began to fall again, Tommy lay awake on his straw mattress. He could hear Anna breathing softly beside him, their mother coughing in her sleep. In his pocket, another gold coin pressed against his thigh like a brand. The money could save them, but the man giving it could destroy them. And in the Gilded Age, Tommy knew, there was no such thing as easy money. The choice in the storm. The next morning came with a sky the color of lead. Snow was falling in lazy flakes, each one melting into the black slush on the streets below. Tommy stood at the window before work, staring at the endless drift, his mind restless. Eddie hadn't come by since the night they'd been chased. That worried him more than Halbrook's thinly veiled threats. In this part of the city, people could vanish as quickly as snowflakes in the gutter, and no one would ask where they'd gone. At the factory, the noise of the looms felt louder than usual. The lint in the air choked him, his hands working automatically. As his thoughts spun, Halbrook's voice echoed in his mind: expendable. The word made his stomach twist. By the time his shift ended, the snow was falling harder. The gas lamps flickered in the wind, casting long, dancing shadows. As he stepped outside, a boy in a ragged cap darted up to him, breathless. "Mr. Halbrook says you're to come right away. Urgent." Tommy followed him through the twisting streets, his boots soaking through in the slush. They stopped at the black carriage, its lanterns glowing like watchful eyes. Halbrook sat inside, the velvet, interior warm and smelling faintly of cigars. "There's a job tonight," Halbrook said without preamble. "Not a delivery, a retrieval." Tommy frowned. "What am I retrieving?" "A ledger," Halbrook said. "A very specific book from a warehouse on Dockside Street. It belongs to a man who owes me a great deal. You will go in, take it, and bring it back to me. Quietly." Tommy hesitated. "And if someone catches me?" Halbrook's eyes were like cold steel. "They won't, because you're clever enough not to be caught. Aren't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. The warehouse was an old brick building leaning toward the river like it had grown tired of standing. Snow piled in. Drifts against its walls and a single lamp burned near the entrance. Tommy's breath formed clouds as he crept closer, keeping to the shadows. The lock on the side door was old and rusted. He jiggled it until it gave way with a soft click. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of rope and salt. Wooden crates were stacked high, their stenciled letters barely visible in the dim light. He moved quickly, searching for the ledger. It wasn't hard to find. It lay on a desk at the back of the room, bound in dark leather, its pages thick. He picked it up, the weight of it surprising him, and then he heard it. A voice. "Who's there?" Tommy froze. A man stepped out from behind a stack of barrels holding a lantern. The light fell on his face and Tommy's heart stopped. It was Eddie. "What are you doing here?" Tommy whispered. "I could ask you the same thing," Eddie said, eyes darting to the ledger in Tommy's hands. "That's Halbrook's, isn't it?" "You know what's in there?" Tommy shook his head. "Don't care. I just need to bring it back." Eddie stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That ledger's not just numbers, Tommy. It's names. Names of people he's ruined, people who disappear." Tommy's grip on the leather tightened. "Why do you know this?" "Because I was supposed to steal it for someone else," Eddie said. "Someone who wants to bring him down." A gust of wind rattled the windows. Somewhere outside, footsteps crunched in the snow. Eddie's voice grew urgent. "If you give that to Halbrook, he'll have what he needs to destroy the rest of them. But if we give it to the other side..." Tommy's stomach churned. The other side could mean the police. It could mean someone worse. But the idea of handing Halbrook more power felt like putting a noose around the whole neighborhood. "What happens to us if we go against him?" Tommy asked. Eddie's eyes darkened. "We run, and we don't stop running." The door to the warehouse banged open, letting in a blast of cold air. Two men stepped inside, their coats dusted with snow. Halbrook's men. Eddie grabbed Tommy's arm. Decide. Now. The world seemed to slow. He could hear his own heartbeat, feel the weight of the ledger in his hands, the pull of two futures. One where he gave it to Halbrook and bought a winter's worth of food and coal. Another where he risked everything to take down the man who had turned him into a pawn. Tommy met Eddie's eyes. "We run." Eddie grinned just for a moment. "Good choice." They bolted for the back door, the shouts of Halbrook's men ringing. Behind them, snow whipped into their faces as they tore down the alley, boots pounding, the ledger clutched tight against Tommy's chest. For the first time in weeks, the gold coins in his pocket felt heavy in a different way, like chains. The hunt through the snow. The wind was a knife in Tommy's face as he and Eddie tore down the narrow alley. Behind them, Halbrook's men shouted, their boots crunching fast in the snow. The ledger was heavy in Tommy's arms, but he clung to it like it was the last rope keeping him from drowning. They burst out onto a wider street, where horse-drawn, wagons rattled past and the gas lamps flickered weakly in the storm. Eddie grabbed Tommy's sleeve and pulled him toward the market district, where the crowd might swallow them up. "This way!" Eddie yelled over the wind. They darted between. Stalls shuddered for the night, ducking behind crates and barrels as the shouts drew closer. Tommy's lungs burned. His boots slipped on the icy cobblestones, but he forced himself forward. Every second they slowed was another second for Halbrook's men to close the gap. "Where are we even going?" Tommy panted. "Somewhere safe," Eddie said. But the way he didn't meet Tommy's eyes made him doubt it. They cut down a side street where the snow had piled knee-deep against the doors. The silence here was eerie, broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant clop of hooves. Then came the sound of footsteps, not behind them, but ahead. Two figures emerged from the snow, blocking the way. Coats pulled high, hats low. No need to ask who they worked for. Eddie cursed under his breath. "Back!" But before they could turn, the men lunged. Tommy shoved the ledger into his coat and threw himself sideways, barely dodging a hand that shot out to grab him. Eddie swung a fist at the other man, landing it with a dull thud before kicking him in the knee. "Run!" Eddie barked again. They sprinted toward the river. The air there was colder, sharper, filled with the smell of wet wood and coal smoke from the steamships. The frozen planks of the dock groaned under their boots. "Are you mad?" Tommy gasped. "There's nowhere to go." Eddie's grin was quick and reckless. "That's what they think." He led Tommy to a small fishing boat tied near the edge. The owner, a wiry man with a scarred face, stood waiting. "This the boy?" he asked. "Yeah," Eddie said. "We need to get across fast." The man jerked his head toward the boat. "Get in." Tommy hesitated. "Who is he?" "Friend," Eddie said. But the word didn't sound like the truth. The dock shuddered as Halbrook's men spilled out from the alleys. The first one spotted them and shouted. Without thinking, Tommy jumped into the boat. The scar-faced man shoved them off just as a rock splashed into the water beside them. The oars bit into the freezing current. Snow stung Tommy's cheeks as he glanced back at the dark shapes on the dock. They didn't follow, not yet. They reached the opposite bank where the city gave way to a sprawl of shanties and warehouses. Here the streets were narrower, the buildings leaning so close they almost touched. Eddie led him into a crumbling brick building lit by a single lantern. Inside, an old woman sat at a table, her sharp eyes watching them. "You've got it?" she asked. Tommy clutched the ledger tighter. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been waiting a long time to see Halbrook fall," she said. "That book's the key. Every bribe, every debt, every man he's bought or broken, it's in there. You give it to me, and I can make sure the police take him down." Tommy looked at Eddie. "Is she telling the truth?" Eddie nodded. "She's the reason I've been working for him. I was trying to get close enough to take this." Tommy's chest felt tight. The gold coins under his bed, the food they'd bought, the coal in the grate. All of it had come from Halbrook's money. If he handed over the ledger, that lifeline would be gone. The old woman's gaze was steady. If you keep it for him, more people will vanish. Men will hang. Families will starve. What's your price, boy? How much for your soul? Tommy didn't answer right away. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the city inch by inch. The final winter night. The snow had not stopped for 2 days. It blanketed the rooftops, filled the alleys, and muffled the city until it felt like the whole world had been swallowed in silence. But Tommy knew that silence didn't mean safety. Somewhere out there, Halbrook's men were hunting him. The old woman's safe house had kept them hidden, but the walls were thin, and food was scarce. Tommy spent most of his time staring at the ledger on the table. Its leather cover was worn, smooth, but the weight of what it held was heavier than any crate he had ever carried. Eddie paced the floor. "She says she'll take it to the police tonight," he said. "Once it's in their hands, Halbrook's done." "And if they're on his payroll?" Tommy asked quietly. Eddie stopped. The truth hung between them. In this city, the police could be just another weapon for a man like Halbrook. Before Tommy could say more, a sound came from outside. The crunch of boots in snow, then a knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps. The old woman's face paled. "That's not the police," she whispered. Eddie reached for a piece of pipe leaning against the wall. Tommy's hand went to the ledger. The knock came again, louder this time. "Stay here," the old woman hissed, moving toward the door. It swung open, and there he was. Mr. Halbrook standing in the doorway, snow dusting the brim of his top hat, silver cane in hand. 2 men flanked him, their eyes cold and empty. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Thomas," Halbrook said, his voice smooth as ever. "But I'm a fair man. Give me the ledger, and we forget all about this. You and your family will want for nothing again." Tommy's heart pounded. "And the people in that book?" Halbrook's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They made their choices, just as you're about to make yours." Eddie stepped forward, pipe raised. "He's not giving it to you." One of Halbrook's men moved fast, wrenching the pipe away and shoving Eddie against the wall. Halbrook took a slow step toward Tommy. "You've seen the world, boy. It's not kind. But with me, you can survive it." Tommy looked at the ledger, then at Halbrook. "Survive isn't the same as live." Halbrook's gaze hardened. "You think you can fight me? I own this city." Tommy's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the decision he had already made. "Then I'll burn your city down, starting with this." Before Halbrook could react, Tommy tossed the ledger into the small coal stove in the corner. Flames roared to life, licking at the leather. The room erupted in shouts. Halbrook lunged, but Eddie blocked him, taking a blow to the ribs. The old woman grabbed Tommy's arm. "Run!" They bolted into the alley, the night air slicing at their faces. Behind them, Halbrook's rage spilled into the snow, his voice cutting through the wind. "You can't hide forever, boy!" They didn't. Stop running until the lights of the docks came into view. The river was a black sheet under the moonlight, the snow falling soft and relentless. Eddie doubled over, gasping. "You just burned the only proof we had," he said. Tommy shook his head. "We burned his power. Now he's got nothing to hold over us. And maybe that's enough." Eddie stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a raw, exhausted sound. "You're either the bravest or the dumbest person I've ever met." "Maybe both," Tommy said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Weeks later, the snow began to melt. Tommy returned to the factory, his hands raw but his spirit unbroken. Halbrook's carriage still roamed the streets, but it never stopped for him again. The gold coins under his bed were gone, spent on food, coal, and shoes for Anna. Life was still hard, The days were still 12 hours long for just $1. But now, when Tommy rose before the sun, he did it knowing he had chosen the kind of man he wanted to be, not the kind Halbrook had tried to make him, and in a city built on survival, that was its own kind of victory.